and welcome everybody to week 6. Last week I said it was week 6, and I think I was ahead of myself. So we're in week 6. Thank you very much for your assignments. I enjoyed reading through them. It was the first time, this is the first time we've run through this iteration of the course. So that was the first time I had looked at the results, and there were some really interesting variations. Which is great because there isn't one right answer to anything. And I think that's the most important thing about business in general and life, that we do our best to come up with what we believe to be the best solution at that time. And working with other people helps us to see the variations. So let me put on my, there we go. So can you guys all see? Yep, you can see my slides. And so let me, whoops, here's Rachel, let her in. Okay, so let me sort of talk. We're eventually going to get around to job analysis and competency modeling. But before we get there, I wanted to give you some feedback on the assignment number 1. And I wanted to talk about what's going on next week. And then we'll get into job analysis and competencies. So I get to yip for a little bit, and then you guys take over. The assignments were very well done. And as I said, there was a lot of variations. There were even some people who took variations in terms of how they decided to present it. So I had a video. One team decided to sort of do a pitch video, and that was very effective. And somebody else did a PowerPoint presentation, which was very effective. So don't be afraid to try something different if that's a good way of sharing information. But I wanted to just give some general feedback about a couple of things that I saw that maybe when you're doing assignment number 2, you might want to incorporate in. So let me talk about these things. So read option A and option B. And I'm going to ask you guys, if you were Aisha and either option A was in the paper or option B was in the paper, which one would you be more likely to be confident as accepting as being real or true? Anybody want to weigh in?
B.
Why?
There's more supporting information around the employees being happy.
Okay.
So
So
it's a little bit more factual and has more evidence to support it.
Yeah. Is there anything about where the evidence is coming from that's of interest to you?
Reputable school.
Yeah. Okay. So they're saying the same thing. One has a little more oomph because it's based on some research that's come from a reputable place, and I've provided the source of where I found the information. And so if somebody wanted to find out more, then they can easily go in and review it. So I really encourage you guys. There were some really important statements made in some of the papers, but they didn't have any external reference. And so I think Aisha can buy into something where if you can provide her with some good references. So you want to think about that. The second thing I wanted to talk about is telling a story with data. And I saw a lot of different things, and I did steal some people's work. So if I show your work, I haven't said who did it, but I'm showing your work because I liked it. And I'm using it as an exemplar and making some observations. Okay, so if something that you did comes up, please don't freak out. It's a good thing. Okay. So the first one is just the chart. So a lot of people focused on civility and respect, and that was the data that was available. And some people put that data directly into their paper, and that's okay, except for my problem with it is now the responsibility for understanding what it means has been passed to the reader. And I know you've already made some sense of it. So help me as the reader to make sense. So I looked at a couple of different strategies. Here's a real simple one. So now I just took the data for the customer service reps, and I went through, and any of the questions that had over 50% of the people disagreeing, either somewhat or disagreeing, I labeled red, okay? And I used red like a stop sign. Red is a problem, stop and have a look. Green is systems all go, and yellow is, whoa, very simple color coding way that you can sort of do it, okay? So, but I just wanted to do the reds because there were so many reds on this one for that particular group. So that tells a story really quickly. Here's something that one of your peers did, which I just loved, and I drew all over it, okay? So all of the pink drawing, that's me. But this person took all of the data and created a bar chart so I can look at all of the data at once. And you can see with my little, when I was looking at it, I started circling information that I thought was really important, and it was really easy to do. So that's a nice way that somebody chose to take the data and visually represent it so that you could start easily making some sense out of it. This was a written piece, and what I really liked about how this person wrote the piece was they did the same thing each time. So they started off with the data, and I added the highlighting. This is when I was marking it because I highlight stuff that I want to remember. So they always started with, okay, here's the percentages who were dissatisfied. Then they started to pull out some of the specific questions where they saw this happening more. Then they started comparing it to the national average. And then there was a remark around that factor versus the other 13 factors for the different groups. This is really nicely condensed information, and when it keeps coming in the same format, as the reader, I know what to expect. And the one thing that I thought that could make it even better is if right where this little arrow is, they could put see Appendix 1. And Appendix 1 is where you can put some of the detailed analysis. So if Aisha is a little number person and wants to look at it, you can have that stuff there for her to explore. But but somebody like me, if I don't want to look at it, I'm not going to look at it, right? So it's a strategy that I really like to use when I'm dealing with numbers and wanting to share it with people effectively. The next thing I wanted to talk about was, and it's building on the last slide, this sort of idea of having a framework for how you're presenting your data. And has anybody here heard of Simon Sinek? A few of you are nodding your heads. Simon Sinek is one of the big thinkers out there, and he's done a lot of work on what he calls why, purpose. And it's a really nice framework, even for presenting a proposal, because the idea is start with the why. Why am I worried about civility and respect? And answer that whole question. Once I've finished explaining why it's important, now I can move to how. So what's the process that I'm recommending that we implement in order to address this? And then talk about what. How will I know if it's been successful? It's a nice format. And what I noticed was there were some people that started with why, added in some what, went back to why, all of a sudden they're in how. And so I was sitting there going like, oh, we can streamline this. We can help somebody move from big picture down to the details by using a framework. You don't have to use this framework, but think about that when you're writing a business report. What's a framework and how do I repeat it? Okay. And the other thing is time is money in business. So edit. You know, I put a 1,500 word limit. I didn't keep to that, but I didn't even look at the word count. But if we have been given a 15-minute time limit, that's how much time that person can allot to looking at it in a thoughtful way. If we ignore the time and we write more, or then the problem is they might not have time to attend to the entire piece and they'll give up. And you might have great stuff in there, but they haven't seen it. So really take the time to edit, use the strategy of pulling stuff out and putting it into appendices. You know, if you've got some important stuff, but sort of like you got your A stuff and your B stuff, put your B stuff in the appendix, and then people can choose to look at it. Okay. So those are my thoughts. And before I move on, are there any questions that you want to ask about that stuff? Yeah, Erin.
I definitely struggled. I stayed to the word limit, but it was hard to do. And I think part of it was like, you're given so much information, but like in real life, you would have actually had consultations with people, with like Aisha herself, and gotten the information that you really wanted. And just little things, you know, like looking at the email she sent and realizing like, if you were sending that email, you would never send that, because she said that her wording was like, they would acknowledge any of the concerns or like deal with any of the concerns, which is not true, because she knew that she had the budget to only deal with 1 or 2 or whatever, right? So it's like, there's just all these little things. And then it's like, you're trying to kind of make this plan that is very concise and in 1,500 words. So like, I'm really annoying about trying to be thorough about that stuff and thinking into too many details. But yeah, that's where I kind of got stuck on some of this stuff and really trying to condense. But yeah.
So do you think the appendix idea might help?
Probably, or just like maybe not overthinking those little details of, you know, the email type thing.
Okay. John, you had a comment.
Well, just a request that if, you know, appendices are, you know, allowed, then in the parameters of the, at least, you know, for this assignment, like to me, that would count, an appendix would count as part of the word limit.
Okay.
So that would need to be clarified.
Yeah, so that was one of the things, like when I was thinking at the end, and again, just to reiterate, it's the first run through this course. And I know in the past in other courses, I've said to students, I don't count appendices towards the word count. Never thought about it here, going to add it in.
Makes sense. Yeah, well, you know, as you know, that we did the video, and keeping that to 15 minutes and trying to go through all these things in a thorough and thoughtful manner, that was hard. That was really, really hard. Like I
gotta say, you did a really good job of it, and you kept me as your audience engaged through the whole piece. If you had gone to 20 minutes, you might have lost me.
That's true. Well, we had to re-record it because the first time we did it was about 22. We're just like, no. Thanks.
Okay. And the other thing, John, if you do ever, well, you're going to be doing another video, but it's not so, but for assignment 2, if anybody chooses to do a video, I can post a link that my son-in-law gave me for editing the videos, if you're not sure how to edit them. And it might save you from having to re-record them, because I sometimes edit these videos. Okay. All righty. Anybody else want to say anything? Was it an okay learning experience? That's the key thing. Did you guys learn something in the process? I'm seeing a lot of nods. Good. That's the important thing. And I think the wellness is such a hot topic. So it was exciting to read what you guys were learning and stuff. And that's the important thing. Okay, now I've got some good news. Next weekend is May long weekend, 2-4 weekend. So what does that mean? The good news is that there isn't a facilitated discussion next week, but then you're going, how do I earn my participation grade? And so I've set it up. I don't know how it always happens when I design the course, and then when I'm doing it, these activities seem to always fall on the weeks when it's, you know, a long weekend and we don't have our meeting. But what I decided to do was I put you into teams and we're going to do some research. The main topic next week is recruitment. And you can see I'm going to introduce this sort of model that looks at the recruiting process from starting at the outside. So what's going on with the environment that's going to impact on recruiting, right to the end where we've finished our search, but let's go back and have a look at the search and see what worked and what didn't work. And so rather than asking everybody to look at all of these sections, I'm putting you guys into groups and asking you to do a little video. Can you read those groups okay? Or is it too small? Because I've also posted this on the announcements, but I haven't released it yet. So let's see. The first section is external issues impacting recruitment. So I've got Steve, Brittany, and Aaron working together on that one. The next one is building a brand, an organizational brand. So that's Lori, Doram, and Kim. Then we've got the recruiter hiring manager relationship, which is John, Rylan, and Martin. Defining the search parameters, which is our Western team of Marcia and Sandy. Then conducting the search, Joanne, Dawn, and Eleanor, and evaluating the search, Rachel, Doug, and Jessica. Okay. And so when you go into next week's module, you'll see there's a page for each of these sections. So there's sort of an introduction and stuff, and then there's a page for each of these sections. You don't have to go through all the readings for every section. The group will go to their page, they'll do the readings, they'll pull out the key points, and I'm asking you to put together a short video that we can post, and then everybody can watch and learn about what the key elements are, okay? So that's the plan. And one of the suggestions I make, so what have I done? I've created discussion groups that are private for each of these. So if you go into the learning management system, you should be able to reach this particular group and decide if you want to do your organizational stuff through that discussion board, or if you want to exchange emails or however, create a WhatsApp group or whatever you guys want to do to talk to each other. But you can, because you haven't shared contact information, I just thought that would be one way that you can do that initial connect and decide how you want to talk to each other. And then you can have a look at the material and start putting it together. And to be honest, doing a Zoom meeting and recording it is probably the easiest thing to do. You know, you might want to put a couple of visuals together and a loose script and talk to the key points. Okay, any questions about it?
Where in the LMS do we find this, the chats that you set up? I'm just searching now.
You should go into the discussion board, and so go under discussions and go right to the bottom. And there might, do you see something that says week 7 recruitment? I think that's what it ended up being called.
It is. It's at the bottom,
Oh, this.
right
Okay.
before it says online office.
Okay, so you found it? Yeah, so that's where, and
your group is already assigned. Okay.
So Doram, you can just see one group, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the group that you're with. I can see all 6 groups. So if I don't see some action happening, I'll get in touch with people and say, hey, you know, you need to connect with so-and-so, and this is where you can connect, okay? But I'm also putting up a posting for people who aren't here today, or if they don't watch the video, okay? Any other questions? All righty, so let's talk a little bit about this week's discussion, which was job analysis and competency modeling. And I'm going to start with the definitions. Might as well start there, right? And when you look at this, what do you, and after your readings and stuff, what are some of the ideas or differences that you can see between job analysis and competency modeling? When you looked at them, what did you say? Hey, okay, here's the difference. So with, oh, Eleanor,
Sorry, it took a sec to find the hand.
that's okay. That hand is hard to find and I start panicking.
My main difference between the two was that, to me, job analysis looks at the sort of fine detail of a position, whereas competency modeling looks at the big picture of the organization and how each role contributes to that, rather than their specific technical skills and things.
Yeah. And does the competency focus as much on the job as the job analysis?
I think it could, depending on the size of the organization, but for the most part, no.
Okay. Yeah, because if you think about, if an organization is trying to move more to an agile structure, responsive, resilient, I'm trying to think of all the buzzwords, right? Something like a competency model where we're saying, hey, these are people's strengths. This is what they do well. And that's sort of the Marcus Buckingham strengths finder and all of that stuff. Then it's easier to put people on projects where either we're focusing on bringing their strengths in, or we're seeing it as a developmental opportunity for them, okay? Whereas a job analysis says, here's the box, that's your job, and all the things that go in it. Dora, yeah.
Yeah, I like all the comments so far. Where I landed was, it's sort of, what do you need for the type of job? And I think that's what you're saying. You know, if I even looked at AHP, they've got these customer service roles, and the tasks are likely highly repeatable. They're likely dealing with a lot of turnover. I'd prefer a job analysis application for that.
Mhm.
Whereas, you know, if they've got, like you say, fluid roles and fluid leadership roles, they're taking on multiple projects over time, you may care about a skill set over a checklist, so to speak.
Okay. So the organization's strategy and goals is going to impact the direction that we go. It's going to impact the structure that the organization takes, the need for agility versus the need for the ability to repeat things consistently and efficiently. And that will also impact in terms of how we want to describe the work or the skills that we need people to have. Okay. Yeah, Doug.
Yeah, I kind of was looking at that as well. Like with the competency modeling, where it's more based on skills or lack thereof. I think, you know, when you have jobs or roles that could touch on multiple aspects of the organization, I think that's where that competency modeling really comes into play, because you're looking particularly at their skills, which may transfer from role to role, where when you're looking at the job analysis, I think that's just really structured right at the job and the role level. So, I mean, smaller companies, sometimes you need to be more versatile, and you need to have, you wear more hats, I guess, so to speak, in a smaller organization. So I think, sometimes the smaller organizations, not only does it allow you to be more agile, but it also allows you to use fewer personnel in multiple roles.
Okay. So it's kind of funny because, when an organization often starts up, everybody's expected to do a little bit of everything, and we don't define roles really carefully. Then as the organization grows, we get into this whole idea of greater definition so we can be more efficient and all the rest of it. But now we're moving towards being responsive, not efficient, being responsive to our customer. And that requires a different way of organizing. And so now we're moving to this. A lot of organizations are moving towards this agile structure. Other things I was thinking about was when I do a job analysis, I'm looking at what somebody's been doing. It has a bit of a backwards viewpoint, whereas the competency allows for more, where might this job be going? Where might this person or these responsibilities be going? So I thought it might have more of a forward perspective and also fit more into a framework of growth and development as opposed to efficiency. I'm doing the box for efficiency. So so those are some of the other things that I was thinking about when I was looking at these two models. But the two of them have, Rylan, you had a comment.
The one thing that I think I would keep in mind from my own perspective is when you're looking at that, what have they been doing in a role, especially when you're in that, okay, we've been open for a little while, we're starting to understand where people fall, is that discontinuity of expectation. So when somebody looks at and is onboarded and said, here's what we expect from you, and then they get into a role and that doesn't always line up, it can lead to even more turnover in those roles. Whereas if you can have that job analysis and go, okay, based on what you've been doing, here's what we really want that role to look like. As you onboard new people, they can have a really clear, this is what I'm going to be doing. And for those high turnover roles, sometimes that can help keep those people in it, because they're people that understand what they're going to be doing and want to be doing that thing.
Yeah.
Versus that competency model still leaves things a little bit gray and can cause some of that disconnect and turnover.
Okay, so and that, Rylan, that was a great example about, there was a diagram on the site that sort of said, hey, job analysis, competency modeling, it impacts on all of these different areas that HR is responsible for. And so whether it's training and development, onboarding, recruiting, it has a huge impact. So understanding how we want to do it and how we want to explain what we're expecting in new employees that we need them to do when we onboard them will be impacted by it. So great example. One of the challenges that's come up is, or that was raised this week, was how do we keep it current? Because, what I was doing last year might not be what I'm doing this year, especially if my job is impacted significantly by technology, or if I'm, in the technology field. And so starting with job analysis, that the diagram there, I took from this site, and, so we do a job analysis, and then once we've done that analysis, we can write job descriptions, we can write the job specification, and we can write performance standards. So there are some typical documents that we'll create using the data we've created. And the question that has been asked is, should employees be asked to update their job description? What role should individual job holders play in this process? And I'm wondering if anybody wanted to comment on that one. John?
I don't really have anything profound to say about it, other than to say that it's something that I very much struggle with in an email that we exchanged we had over the weekend there.
Yeah.
I really struggle with when I'm asked to do this and given very little in terms of parameters. I'm not trained in how to design a job, and I find it really frustrating when they expect me to do it.
Okay.
It makes me feel like I have to justify my existence, and I don't think that's fair.
Okay. So you're understanding that there is a bit of a science to how one does do a job analysis and create a job description. And so asking someone who hasn't been taught some of this science to do it may seem to be a little challenging. Let's go to Ryland, then Dawn, and then Doug.
I think, John, flip side of that coin for me is, and this is really, from my experience, partial to those that are in startup or roles that are changing and developing a lot. But as you periodically go through and do those reviews, it's not so much build me your job description. It's, do you feel that everything you're doing in the last, most recent period of time is accounted for here, so that we can update or provide training in areas that, you've found that you're growing into, but don't feel supported in, et cetera. So that, again, you don't onboard somebody with a job description that says X, Y, Z, but really you've learned, adapted, and transitioned to be doing A, B, and C. So that would be my 2 cents there, that it's nice to sometimes not necessarily have them build it, but get the input from the person doing that job to show how it's adapted while you develop. Once they're a little bit more concrete, less of a regular occurrence.
So when would you, I loved how you phrased the question, because it was very positively phrased. When would you tend to ask that question?
For me, that's that review period that, anytime that you're having a formal sit down with the employee and you have kind of those HR documents in front of you, say, is there anything missing? Is there anywhere that there is a gap, either in the description compared to what you're doing, or, is there something that we're expecting you to be doing that you're not? And where's the disconnect, and how can we bridge that?
Okay, so it's kind of nice to connect it to an event that's happening on a regular basis. Thanks, Ryland. Dawn, you had some comments.
Yeah, we do I've done this a few times with our job. Typically what they do is kind of give you a copy of what the job ad is now, and give you opportunity to go through it and say, no, we don't, I've moved away from doing this, or I am doing this and it's not captured. So you get to be involved in that process.
Mm-hmm.
And by seeing what was there, you start to realize, the new things you're doing and what needs to be added. So we have been part of that process. It's nothing regular. It's different things spur it on, but I have been through it a few times with my position here.
Okay, great. And Doug, you had a comment.
Yeah, I think as kind of Ryland was talking about, I think the input from the individual in that role is very important, because you don't want these job descriptions written by somebody who's so far removed from the position that they really don't have an understanding of what the day-to-day operations are. And there could be a very real disconnect between what, somebody in upper management thinks the role is to what the actual role is on a day-to-day basis. And I think that can be a very dangerous thing without the input of the person that is, in that current role.
Yeah, I'm laughing because many years ago, when I worked at the paint manufacturing plant, I was writing a job description for one of the positions out on the floor, on the manufacturing floor. And I was reading the current one, and it said they had to move carts and they weighed up to X number of tons. And I had visions of these poor people pulling these things, and I go out, and of course it's nothing like what my brain was thinking it was. And so by going out, talking to people and looking at things, you get a much better, and that's why on the site I talked about all the different techniques, and each technique has a up and a downside to it. You know, just strictly observing a job, unless it's repetitive, you can't get enough information by watching, but by going out and watching for a couple of minutes, you start to fill in some of the gaps or misconceptions nicely. Eleanor, you had a comment.
Yeah, it was just to respond to sort of like Dawn was saying, and the questions you were asking about the timeline. In our brand new collective agreement that's only just been passed, we have a clause about reevaluation. And so it's either, it can be on request of the employee or by the employer according to the schedule, which is at least once in a 5-year period. The request from employees cannot exceed the once in a 5-year period. And it says the employer shall reevaluate the position and give the employee the results with reasons in writing. So that doesn't sound like there's a lot of back and forth, but in practice there will be here. But it has actually been codified to make sure that it doesn't exceed that time period, because especially how our institution works is that there had been like a wealth of jobs that were reclassified in 2011 and then not since. And so there has been a lot of responsibility drift and yeah, I mean, like the technology in 2011 is not the same as what it is today. So now they've built that in to say that it has to be done this often, which is good.
Okay. And so the interesting thing will be as, so is that new language in your collective agreement?
It's just something that hadn't been addressed before, and the collective agreement is very new.
Yeah. So, so having that language in the collective agreement means next time you have negotiations, if you're starting to discover that a 5-year time period isn't enough, that's going to be something that's going to get raised and perhaps adjusted so it works better.
Yeah.
Great. So lots of different experiences and stuff about how to maintain currency. So if I generalize, what I heard was it's good to involve the employee because nobody knows the job quite like that person. But am I interviewing them and pulling information from them, or am I dumping the responsibility on them and maybe not explaining exactly how the information is going to be used? And so how I do it, how I help the employee to provide useful information, because honestly, I got to be careful if the employee feels the more they add into the position, the higher their rate, then I'm going to end up with a whole bunch of stuff in there that's not important or relevant. And so I have to help. I think it's important to make sure employees are involved, but I just not dump it on them. Okay. With the competency model, we've got the same problem. We have to keep the model up to date. The skills and competencies that we need people to have, they're going to change. And I put the diagram, was it week 1 or week 2, where we looked at the competency model that the Human Resources Association has created. And the way that they did it was they split it into 2 sections, the functional knowledge areas. So that's where we have stuff like recruitment, labor relations, talent management, total rewards. And then it has the enabling competencies. So these are the skills that somebody's going to need in order to be successful in the human resources environment. And I would suggest that probably the competencies are going to be a little more consistent than the functional areas, because there may be new functions brought in and other functions that disappear over time. And this I found particularly interesting because this is out of the YMCA in the National Capital Region. And the way that they have done their competency model is they have identified 5 core competencies that they want all employees to demonstrate. And then they have technical competencies that are associated with different positions. So everybody has to understand the organization. Everybody has to be in developing competencies around problem solving, communication, interpersonal skills. That will support the organization's values and strategic goals. And then the technical competencies we can adjust as the job and evolves and changes. So some different approaches. Before I move on, any questions or thoughts? Okay. So on the worksheet, I asked you to go through the material, and I said, so the first question I said was, given the 5-year plan, which approach, job analysis or competency modeling, would support the changes that are going to happen at the pharmacy? So, you know, Aisha has this 5-year plan. She's bringing in all of these new areas where she's going to be selling stuff. Last week, we talked about some of the technological changes that could impact how she runs the pharmacy. And so, given all that's going on, this is the question that I wanted you guys to explore. And I'm gonna put you into small groups, I think. Or do you want to just talk about it in the big group? Big group, John says big group. John wins. Okay, so given the 5-year plan, anybody want to weigh in on this? What do you think? How might that impact her choice? Yes, Kim.
I think with the high turnover rate that Aisha tends to have with her employees, especially the customer service reps, I think the job analysis approach is going to be best for her particular organization.
Okay.
I think focusing on the job itself, what is going to be required of the people that come into it, and what's going to be expected, and not specifically the competencies of each employee is going to be, I think, the smarter route to take for her.
Okay. So what about the pharmacists?
That would be different, wouldn't
Okay.
it? Obviously, dependent upon with the pharmacists. I mean, they don't make up the largest majority of the employees. So I think, yeah, when you bring it up that way, it's going to have to be a more hybrid approach from the sounds of things.
Okay. Yeah, because you know, the pharmacists, they may be a small group, but it would be interesting to look at the revenues of a pharmacy to figure out where the money comes in. I have the feeling it might be through the pharmacy. And so making sure that you've got top-notch people in there, and the whole, certainly my experience is that the role of a pharmacist has really changed. I have to admit, when I was in high school, and don't ask me how many years ago that was, I worked at a Shoppers Drug Mart, and that's back when you got the prescriptions on a piece of paper, and I had to file them on a numbering system. And so I would watch the pharmacist, and as far as I could figure, most of their time they were counting pills. Now I look at a pharmacist, well, my parents use a pharmacist, and he's their first source of health information. So if he's wasting his time counting pills, there's something wrong, right? Rylan, I've been talking too long. You weigh in on this question.
No, really, I was just going to kind of bring up what you had mentioned, that for me, a hybrid is really important when you're in that developmental stage and learning what those roles are going to look like. I think that job analysis is really important to take time and review and stay on top of what your goals are for each person, as well as for your longer term or full-time employees, the ones that are there a lot more. That competency model can work because you do have a lot of changes coming up, and you want to stay flexible and able to react to those changes with those people that are there for a larger number of the hours. But with the ones coming in and out, you want that really clear what they're doing.
Okay,
And it may change.
So-
It may not be something that's going to be the same, especially in that phase that she's in, but you want to know what it is.
so I'm hearing two different strategic models. One is based on efficiency, and that is for the high turnover, low skill positions. And the other is more, the strategy is more growth and development. And a competency model perhaps fitting into that better. Okay, cool. Doug, what do you want to say?
Kind of along the same lines, I thought they would have to take a hybrid approach. And I kind of based it on the mentality right now. They were saying that they're really going towards like a jack of all trades, which in a small sense, you know, where they are now, that is sustainable. But as they onboard more and more products and diversify their offerings to the public, that is not going to be as sustainable as it is right now. So I think they really need to flush that out. They need to kind of come up with those roles that they expect to have for those different products. Like maybe, I know in our presentation we talked about you know, subject matter experts and stuff like that. They might need to come up and flesh out those, but then you really need to use the competency model to make sure that the skill sets that you have will be able to run with those roles.
Okay. So I was, as you were speaking, Doug, I was also thinking that hybrid might be similar to what they've done at the YMCA, where there are some core skills that across the board we need at the pharmacy, interpersonal skills, communication skills, and then for specific jobs, we can get more detailed about the task-related work. Cool. Anybody else want to comment? Okay, let's move to the next one. So, and I put this question in because the one thing that really bugs me about teaching human resources the way that we've always taught it is that it suggests that there are these boxes that HR fits in, and that somebody shows up at your door with a problem and you go, oh, that's a compensation issue, and you deal with it. And the truth is one muddly mess. And so that's why I wanted to introduce the wellness survey. We learned stuff from the survey about things that were making people less satisfied and maybe impacting on their wellness. So that data, does that impact on your thoughts about how we should be trying to describe the work we're asking people to do?
I can't find my hand.
I think you go under more and reactions, or you just start talking.
Oh yeah, I don't want to interrupt if someone's got their hand up, but
Yeah.
you know, a little bit of repeating comments so far, but my thought coming out of the wellness survey is that, let me just go to my notes here. I thought a lot of the discontent and frustration that came out of those results, you could root back to a lack of maybe defined and supported roles. So I pointed at the job analysis approach, like the structured outcome of a job analysis approach would define the roles, define the expectations, and define the needs and training and development of the individual roles within the organization. So if you look at sort of a timeline, what does AHP need now? They need the bloody job analysis approach. And in time, yes, look at what a competency model could add. Because I think that, you know, you need the clarity, and you need to know what role each role needs, and you need to know what supports each role needs, especially if there's, you know, from role to role, you're going to see different degrees of turnover and training requirements. And I think that applies to the pharmacist role as well, because you need to know where, the scope of each role and how they complement and shake each other's hand and what degree of overlap there is. Right now, there's no definition. And I think that's contributing to some of the outcomes that the negative outcomes in the wellness survey.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
Then I have another question. Can
Okay.
you not have a job analysis approach and then in your job description have competencies? So here's the nuts and bolts and the duties and even percentage of your day. And then, as attributes for the candidates that we feel will fit into our organization and our culture, these are some of the attributes and,
Yeah.
AKA competencies.
Yeah. So you can, but do you want them consistent across the organization like they did at the YMCA? Or do you want them specific to specific jobs?
I hadn't thought about that, but I guess
Think
it's just
about it and get back
yeah.
to us, okay?
yeah.
Eleanor, what do you want to say? Maybe you've got an answer to that one.
I have a response anyway, not an answer.
A thought.
In two different ways. One, my response would be in the code of conduct we have, and the other would be in sort of tied to the professional development side of things, where we have a corporate plan that is released every year. And when individual employees are planning for their professional development for the upcoming year, you tie in all of your proposals and your goals, any training, anything like that, to why it's relevant to the corporate plan, which outlines the strategies and the key priorities for the year for the institution. So that sort of information, you can get the what the sort of mandate is. You can get the core competencies that are important to the business, but you can tailor those to individual employees. That's of course after they've already been hired. So maybe that follows more of that bakery model where you've hired them anyway, and then you're going to train them into what's important for you. And then into the sort of code of conduct, into the hiring. I mean, we have a very clear mandate. Someone who is, let's just say, racist isn't going to be hired at an immigration museum. So like there's easy ways maybe to talk about what our workplace competencies and core and mandate would be.
Yeah.
But I think there's ways to build those into different levels, different stages of the process as well.
Okay. All right. So we're starting to see the impact of data that came from somewhere else on sort of the decision-making process. So my final question is, overall, what's the best? Like if you had to tell Aisha, this is my recommendation, what are you going to say? I should have done a poll. John.
I'd just say job analysis because they need, because they're looking to expand and grow their business. They need to know what they need more so than what the employees need.
Okay. Doug?
Yeah, I think in short term, they definitely need to go down the job analysis. They need to flush out those roles. Right now, I think there is a little bit of, I don't want to say disorganization, but just the fact that it doesn't seem like they have those established roles and responsibilities. It seems like everybody's just doing whatever they can. And I think that needs to start at the leadership. They need to define those roles, what the expectations are for their employees. And then as they expand, I think this will expand as the business expands. Maybe they can get more into competencies once they, stabilize their workforce. Then they can really kind of assess what skills they have, what skills are lacking, and then they can hire accordingly.
Or outsource.
Or outsource, yeah.
Right? I'm still thinking about some of those technological solutions going, might be kind of, it might be kind of cool, like rather than trying to find somebody who is specialized in natural beauty products, if you had access to an online discussion with somebody who's an expert, you know, or if there were videos or things. So they may discover that some of the responsibilities that traditionally might have been belonging to a job within the store could be outsourced to an expert. And then they had the opportunity of like bringing in influencers and stuff like that as part of their promotion of products. Anybody else want to weigh in? Okay. Well, what do you think of job analysis and competency planning? Eleanor.
I thought that one that was linked on whatever it was called, ON or OS jobs or whatever, that was terrifying. So
Now, that was
many
government,
words.
right?
Like
That's why I
US
put it
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Like it just was too much information, and even just the task of building that job posting, sitting there and clicking every single thing that could possibly relate, like that was a lot. I don't know how sustainable a model that is.
But we also have a similar model in Canada where you can look up what they're called the NOC. So you can look up job descriptions for typical positions. But yeah, I mean, we can, some organizations, and I mean, so if you go into the public sector job area, you'll see the job descriptions and everything are very detailed, whereas other organizations, it's much looser, right? Erin.
Just speaking on the government stuff, like now looking at the way that the federal government hires, I mean, it's been like this for a long time, but now that they're looking at a lot more remote workers, the job descriptions as they're building these pools are wild. Like because they just, you know, it's open-ended forever, it seems, in the way that they're hiring and building these pools. And it's just so, you know, they have every description, it seems, like all of the different, you know, basic, you know, they put the most basic skills and competencies in there, and then they get a little more specific. And like in my past experience in applying for government jobs 15 years ago, it's like they make you do all those like basic tests, and it's like from really basic testing to a little more specific. And it's just, I really wonder the effectiveness of this type of hiring. I know they try to do like this fairness process and everything, but I don't think anyone else has anything like that. And it's like, it would be really interesting to know, one, the effectiveness of it, two, like what, you know, from previously, like what they did before that and what's changed. But yeah, like now that they're changing to remote work and having things spread out across the country, like how that again is evolving and how that again is changing, and how they're building these pools even bigger than they used to.
I mean, the public sector is unique in that there's an accountability as to how taxpayer dollars are being spent.
Yeah.
And they have a responsibility to demonstrate the values of the country. And so if multiculturalism is a driving value in Canada, then the government is responsible for demonstrating that in their systems and processes. So yeah, it gets really complicated, and I'm sure it doesn't lead to an easier or more efficient process, but it's the accountability piece.
Yeah, it's like just like the amount of things that they will have to put in a listing, like the listing is so long, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, how would I have time to do all of that stuff? Any other thoughts or comments? I used to find this is sort of the nuts and bolts of a lot of what we do in HR, but doing it is takes a special kind of person. How's that? I found it boring and repetitive because it was just, you know, doing the surveys and analyzing the information and drafting and when you do it a lot, there are, you know, your keywords that you want to put in, and you start to understand the impact of certain words on other usages. So yeah, it's an important piece, but it was never my favorite. I just noticed the time. It's 12:31. I'm sorry. I kept gabbing too long. So as usual, I'll hang around if anybody has any questions. I hope everybody has a great long weekend. And if you have any problems with the groups or anything, just flip me an email so I can help in any way that I can. Okay, so otherwise, happy 24th of May weekend, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.